Story 1. Bite me, I'm Dracula. The thick velvet curtains, smelling faintly of dust and despair, parted with a theatrical flourish that even after centuries still felt a little dramatic to Dracula. He blinked, adjusting his eyes to the sheer audacity of the afternoon sun. It wasn't the searing, flesh-withering blaze of old, thanks to his latest UV-blocking contact lenses and SPF 5000, blood-infused naturally, but it was bright enough to make him squint. He stepped out onto the cobbled street of Sigisawara, a faint sigh escaping his lips. "Sunlight," he muttered. "The original reality show, only far less entertaining than Keeping Up with the Kardashians." His immaculately tailored black coat, woven from the finest nightmare silk and a touch of organic cotton, for breathability, you understand, billowed around him. A passing tourist, clad in an I Transylvania t-shirt, snapped a photo. Dracula resisted the urge to shimmer into a bat and relieve himself on the man's head. Such indignities were beneath him, mostly. "It wasn't always like this, Imra," he grumbled to his long-suffering, perpetually put-upon manservant, who was attempting to wrestle a selfie stick out of a particularly tenacious hedge. Imra, a man whose patience was clearly forged in the fires of eternal servitude, merely grunted. "Remember the days, Imra," Dracula continued, sweeping a hand through the air, nearly clocking a pigeon. "The terror, the abject, soul-crushing dread. A whisper of my name would send entire villages into fits of panic. Now I'm a breakfast cereal mascot." He pulled out his phone, a custom-made obsidian model with a bat wing case, and scrolled through his Instagram feed. There, sandwiched between a picture of a cat playing a tiny piano and a recipe for kale smoothies, was an ad for Count Chocula's Crispy Crypt Crunch. The horror, the unadulterated saccharine horror. "Look at this," he exclaimed, shoving the phone under Imra's nose. "Chocolate-flavored cereal, and the audacity. They've given me a jaunty little cape. I haven't worn a jaunty little cape since 1476, and that was for a particularly ill-advised masquerade ball where I accidentally bit a duke." "Sire." Imra finally managed to disentangle the selfie stick. "Perhaps, my lord, if you were to embrace the modern age, rebrand Dracula, the original influencer." "Sire." Dracula recoiled as if struck by a silver cross dipped in holy water. "Sire." "Rebrand? Imra, I am Dracula. I am the night. I am the creeping dread that slithers into your nightmares. I am not, I repeat, not a lifestyle guru for artisanal blood sausages." He stalked past a souvenir shop, his gaze falling upon a rack of plastic fangs. They were bright white, perfectly symmetrical, and clearly made in a factory in Shenzhen. He remembered his own fangs, honed over centuries on the jugulars of the unsuspecting, sharp as obsidian blades, capable of puncturing even the thickest chainmail. These plastic abominations looked more suited for a toddler's Halloween costume than a creature of eternal darkness. "They've defanged me, Imra," he lamented, his voice dripping with melodrama. "Figuratively, of course. My actual fangs are still quite capable. Last Tuesday, I accidentally bit a hole in my teacup while contemplating the existential angst of eternal life." His attention was then caught by a particularly egregious t-shirt. It depicted a cartoonish bat wearing oversized sunglasses, with the caption, "Bite me, I'm a vampire." "That's it," Dracula declared, his voice rising to a crescendo that made a nearby street performer drop his accordion. "I'm done. Stick a fork in me. Imra, I'm well and truly done." "Sire." Imra blinked. "Done with what, my lord? Immortality? Being the bane of humanity?" "No, you dolt! Done with this charade, this mockery. They've turned fear into a marketable commodity. They've taken the very essence of my being and reduced it to a novelty item." He gestured wildly at the offending t-shirt. "A novelty item that probably costs more than a decent plot of consecrated ground." He pointed a finger, long and elegant, at a group of teenagers posing for a selfie in front of a fake coffin. "Look at them. Not a single shiver, not even a nervous twitch. They think I'm a joke, a punchline." The last time I tried to instill fear, a young woman asked if I was doing method acting for a TikTok. Dracula slumped onto a nearby bench, the ancient wood groaning under his weight. He pulled a silver hip flask from his inner pocket and took a long swig. It wasn't blood, of course. That would be uncivilized in broad daylight. It was a rather potent blend of hibiscus tea and single malt scotch, for medicinal purposes naturally. Sire. I remember the early days, he mused, a faraway look in his crimson eyes. The screams, the desperate prayers, the hastily erected crucifixes made from splintered fence posts. Those were the days. Now, they ask for my autograph. My autograph. Imra! As if I'm some sort of B-list celebrity who endorses tooth-whitening kits. Imra, ever the pragmatist, offered. Perhaps you could pivot, my lord. Go into artisanal cheese-making. You do have a rather impressive cellar for aging. Dracula shuddered. Imra, you know how I feel about dairy products. The curdling. It reminds me of certain historical events I'd rather not dwell upon. Sire. He stood up abruptly, his cape swirling around him. No, I shall not be relegated to the dusty annals of pop culture. I am Dracula, and I shall reclaim my fear. He strode purposefully towards the souvenir shop, a dangerous gleam in his eye. Imra, sensing impending chaos, sighed and hurried after him. Inside, the shop was a cacophony of kitsch. Mini-coffins, bat-shaped keychains, glow-in-the-dark vampire teeth, and an alarming number of plush toy bats with googly eyes. The shop owner, a portly man with a perpetually tired expression, was struggling to restock a shelf of Dracula's deliciously dark chocolate bites. Dracula approached the counter, his presence casting a sudden, inexplicable chill over the cheerful atmosphere. The shop owner looked up, his eyes widening slightly. "Good afternoon, sir," the owner said, attempting a polite smile. "Can I help you find anything fangtastic?" He chuckled weakly at his own pun. Dracula leaned over the counter, his voice dropping to a low, menacing rumble that usually made strong men wet themselves. "Sire." "Yes," he hissed. "You can help me. You can help me understand why my image, my very essence, has been reduced to this sugary travesty." He gestured dramatically at the chocolate bites. "Do you think for one moment that I, Vlad Tepes, Prince of Wallachia, impaler of thousands, drink chocolate milk? Do you think I'm concerned with my calcium intake?" The shop owner, now genuinely unnerved, stammered. "Well, it's for the tourists, sir. They like a bit of fun, a bit of light-hearted horror." "Light-hearted horror?" Dracula roared, his voice echoing through the small shop, causing a shelf of miniature gargoyles to tremble. "There is nothing light-hearted about eternal damnation. Nothing! And as for horror, let me tell you about a Tuesday in 1462 when I decided to redecorate my castle with the skulls of my enemies. That, my friend, was horror." A group of Japanese tourists, initially fascinated by what they assumed was a very convincing street performer, began to back away slowly, their selfie sticks forgotten. "Sire." Dracula, now thoroughly incensed, swept his arm across the counter, sending a cascade of plastic fangs, fake blood capsules, and Bite Me t-shirts clattering to the floor. "Sire." "This," he declared, holding aloft a particularly flimsy set of plastic fangs, "this is an insult, an abomination, a mockery of centuries of terror." He crushed them in his hand with surprising force, bits of white plastic scattering like confetti. "Sire." The shop owner, pale as a ghost, muttered, "Sir, please, you're scaring the customers." "Sire." "Good," Dracula thundered. "That's the idea. That is precisely the idea." He turned his gaze, now blazing with righteous fury, upon the terrified tourists. "You want a show? I'll give you a show. You want fear? You shall have fear." He unfurled his cape, spreading it wide to reveal its inner lining, which shimmered with an unsettling, otherworldly glow. He then let out a shriek, ancient and primal, a sound that had once curdled blood and shattered sanity. It wasn't the refined, theatrical shriek of a staged Dracula. It was the raw, guttural cry of a creature of the night, full of malice and a deep-seated annoyance. The effect was instantaneous. The tourists, who had been so nonchalant moments before, screamed. Not polite, surprise screams, but full-throated, panic-stricken shrieks. They tripped over each other, desperately trying to escape the shop. The street performer outside, hearing the commotion, packed up his accordion and fled. Dracula watched them go, a grim satisfaction spreading across his face. He murmured. "That's more like it. A genuine, unadulterated shriek of terror. Almost brings a tear to my ancient eye." Imra, who had taken refuge behind a display of Transylvanian jams, emerged cautiously. "My lord," he said, surveying the wreckage of the shop, "I believe you've made your point." "Indeed, Imra," Dracula said, dusting off his hands, perhaps a bit over the top, but one must occasionally remind humanity of its proper place, and my proper place is not on a breakfast cereal box. The shop owner, still trembling, managed to gasp, "Get out! Get out of my shop! I'm calling the police!" Dracula merely scoffed. "Police? My dear man, I have survived crusades, witch hunts, and a particularly nasty encounter with a very determined garlic farmer. Do you truly believe the mere constable can deter me?" He paused. "Though, I must admit, I do find their hats rather fetching, very symmetrical." He surveyed the shattered plastic fangs and scattered merchandise. "Consider this a re-education, if you will, a gentle reminder that some things are best left untamed. Some legends are not meant to be diluted for mass consumption." As he turned to leave, his gaze fell upon a small, dusty corner of the shop where a single, unassuming wooden stake lay. It looked old, worn, and distinctly uncommercialized. He picked it up, examining the rough-hewn wood. "Now that," he mused, a faint smile touching his lips, "that has potential. Simple, classic, effective." He twirled it in his hand. "Perhaps I shall start my own line of bespoke terror implements. Hand-carved, ethically sourced wood. All natural, fear-inducing properties." Imra groaned. "My lord, please, no more business ventures." "Nonsense, Imra," Dracula declared, striding out of the devastated shop, the sunlight glinting off his perfectly coiffed hair. He felt a lightness he hadn't experienced in centuries. "A purpose. This time, we market to the purists, the connoisseurs of genuine dread. No cartoon bats, no chocolate, just good, old-fashioned, blood-curdling fear." He stepped out into the bright afternoon sun, a renewed spring in his step. The tourists were still scattering like startled pigeons, and a siren wailed faintly in the distance. Dracula inhaled deeply, a faint smile on his lips. It was good to be feared again. And perhaps, just perhaps, he'd send the shop owner a discount coupon for his new line of steaks. After all, a little healthy competition never hurt anyone, except, of course, those who found themselves on the wrong end of a well-crafted piece of wood. Story 2. Ransom. The obnoxious ring of a cell phone disturbs the silent dark room. There's a groan, and a deep brown hand with a slight hint of aging slowly reaches for the phone to quickly shut off the offending sound. Realizing that it's a call, Janice Weaver hits the blurry green button and holds the phone to her ear. Silence rings out on the other side of the phone as she moves to sit up. "Hello?" she calls out groggily. "Who is this?" Janice's body stiffens as she hears a familiar voice in utter distress. "Mom, please," a voice calls out between broken sobs. "These people are upset with Dad and they're asking for money Dad stole." "I don't know what they're talking about, Mom. Call the The phone is ripped from her daughter's hand, and a deep, inhuman voice fills the speaker. "You have 48 hours to give us back the $30 million that was stolen from us, or we will kill your daughter." Panic erupts from the woman's body, and without a moment of hesitation, and shouts, "I'm going to call the police!" The voice breaks out in a distorted laugh and the call ends. Still shaken, the woman rushes to turn on the bedroom lights. Her mind is racing just as much as her heart. She must contact her husband. "Ava, call Jonathan," she commands. The phone rings for what feels like an eternity, and she hears his voice. "Hello?" he calls out. "Honey, it's me we have." Her frantic voice is cut off as he continues speaking. "You have reached the personal phone number of Jonathan Weaver. Please leave a message after the beep." The woman waits impatiently for the phone to beep, and she leaves a message, anger rising at his refusal to answer. "You need to pick up the phone now. This odd man has our daughter, and they claim you stole $30 million from them. Please, if you did something wrong, fix it now. Our daughter is in danger." She clicks the red button on her phone at almost lightning speed. Just as Janice is about to command her phone to call 911, she receives a video call. "They have our daughter," she utters before waiting for the screen to load up the face of the caller. "Mom, it's me," a voice says with just as much panic as Janice feels. "I just got a call saying you were kidnapped, and they were asking for money, and I—" Her daughter breaks down in sobs. "What did Dad do?" "We're okay, sweetie," she reassures her daughter, and her heart begins to soften from its relentless pounding as she begins to relax. "I almost called the police thinking you were kidnapped. I would text your father that you're okay, but I can't find my reading glasses." Janice squints at her phone screen at the blurred movements her daughter makes as she reaches for her face. her hands looking abnormal as she wipes away the tears. The phone blinks as it begins to lose connection. With a sigh of relief, Janice says, "Well, I'll let you go if you have time tomorrow. Can you please help me enlarge the words on my phone?" "Sure, Mum, and don't answer any more calls from that number. It was probably some random hacker using AI trying to steal. I'll help you block it later." "Okay, bye, sweetie." "Bye, Mum." Before her daughter can hang up, Janice remembers that her daughter is supposed to either be at trip in California or going next week. "Hey, sweetie, when was that trip of yours again?" she asks. But her daughter never answers. Instead, the last thing Janice sees is her blank stare as she quickly hangs up the phone. Janice yawns and gets ready to get back into bed when she calls her husband again. His voicemail responds, annoyed. She decides to leave a message again. "Honey, ignore my last call. It seems like someone was trying to steal our information and I panicked." She pauses for a moment and then softly says, "If it's possible, can you please come home early? This entire situation has left me on edge, and I don't want to be alone." She hangs up the phone, and as she's about to place it on the nightstand, it rings again. "Honey, is that you?" she answers. "Mom, please give them their money so I can go home. I don't have much time before they come back, but please call the police and call Dad." The frantic, familiar voice comes back again. This time the voice sounds choppier than the first. Janice rolls her eyes before responding. "I know this is a fake call. You're sick for even using my daughter's voice for something like this. Do not call this number again." "Mom, no. Janice hangs up the phone and throws it on her husband's empty bedside. She angrily turns around and goes back to sleep. There's only a couple of hours left before the morning, and sky is starting to turn into various pinks and oranges. Janice's alarm rings and she groans at the small amount of sleep she has gotten. She hits the volume button on the side of her phone, a trick her daughter taught her, and decides to sleep in for a little while longer. Ping, ping, ping! Janice is constantly pinging with hundreds of messages. Hopefully her daughter hasn't gone on the trip just yet, because she needs help seeing the words on her phone. Ignoring the messages, Janice gets ready to start her day. As she's about to head out, she receives a phone call. "Hello? Who is this?" She calls out to the person on the other line. "Janice, it's me, Tanya," her friend responds. "You haven't been answering my texts, and I just wanted to see if you needed anything." "I'm fine, Tanya. I just had a little scare last night. But what's the matter? And why are you blowing up my phone?" Janice questions. "Oh, Janice, you don't know." Janice's heart begins to quicken again as worry begins to form in her gut. "No what?" she asks in a trembling voice. "It's Jonathan," Tanya says with a voice teeming with emotion. "They found him dead this morning. The news says it's suicide. I'm surprised the police didn't call you." At first, she stands in her kitchen in a state of shock. But when reality kicks in, Janice's heart drops and she falls to her knees on the ground, breaking out into gut-wrenching sobs. "I'm so sorry, Janice. They said he did it because he stole millions from a company and..." Not wanting to hear anymore, she hangs up the phone. She tries to collect herself as much as she can before she breaks the news to her daughter. "Ava, please call Sweetie," she commands in a broken voice. Calling Sweetie. The phone rings and rings and rings until her daughter's voicemail message reaches her ear. Tears pour down her face as she hangs up. "Ava, call Sweetie," she cries. Calling Sweetie. She waits for her daughter to pick up the phone, but instead she's sent to voicemail again. Janice continues to hang up and call her again and again. Each time she cries harder, and until her words are so incoherent, Ava stops answering her requests. Janice lay on the floor for hours, not wanting to move and to just dissolve into a pool of nothing. She stayed there for hours, ignoring the knocks on her door. She stares blankly at the sunset from her kitchen window, ignoring the soft click of her front door and the shuffling of feet moving closer to her. The only thing that Janice cared about was why. Why was this happening to her? Why would her husband steal? Why isn't her daughter answering the phone? And why would he so selfishly ruin the life they had spent years building? Janice took a deep breath and closed her eyes as the footsteps stopped, not caring who they belonged to. She wasn't going to put up a fight or break down and cry. She said a silent prayer for her daughter and herself and let the numbing of her body consume her. No matter what happens, she hopes she'll be able to rest. Story 3. Culinary Deviant. The door to the manor's third-floor private chamber creaked as it opened, revealing a frail silhouette lit by the soft glow of beeswax candlelight.
Alice Reed crept through the unoccupied room and awoke the dormant hearth. Sweat glistened off the young girl's tired face as she sat at the foot of the
large oak bed frame to catch her breath and calm her nerves in front of the growing fire. Though Alice was many moons away from womanhood, a life of poverty and servitude had robbed her of her youth. Her hardened face had long abandoned its healthy flush and instead donned an ashen pallor.
But there was still one desire that reinvigorated her spirit and body.
When the urge came, the cravings would be the only thought that occupied her mind. Even in sleep she could not escape them,
manifesting into dreams that would leave her feeling unfulfilled. Venus that gnawed at her relentlessly until she finally gave in to temptation.
Brushing strands of damp auburn hair away from her cheeks, Alice readied herself. Tonight was the culmination of a months-long obsession.
There would only be one opportunity and limited time for her to execute her plan.
She'd been excused from her evening duties by feigning pain and discomfort, alluding to the start of the monthly sickness, which put her in poor condition to be serving the family. If the other maidservants didn't find her back in the west hallway, when they returned from washing up after supper, they would surely inform housekeeper Emilia. Anything to gain favor.
Temporary grace from the tyrant.
The Byron estate was one of the largest in Norfolk, but the manor itself only occupied a small fraction of the land.
William Byron III's gardens sprawled over almost half of the rolling lowlands, and it boasted a large collection of botanical rarities that very few in the county,
and perhaps even the kingdom, would have even seen. It was the envy of other lords, noblemen, naturalists, and many others of high status. Reaching into her apron, Alice pulled out a small bundle of ingredients she'd collected. The sweet oil and herbs were easy to find in the kitchen, but the third, that took more discretion and careful planning to acquire, and it was finally in her hands. Alice ran her fingers over its smooth, bulbous body, caressing its ridges and folds. It covered her palm fully, threatening to spill over, but it was all held together by the bright red skin that pulled taut over the undulations.
It was grotesque, repulsive, even one of the devil's creations.
Rumors floated through the manor's grounds that this flesh, redder than blood, was evil, that it caused afflictions of the body and soul,
that it was poison, that it was designed to pollute the mind with lust and temptation.
The anticipation of consuming its corrupt flesh excited Alice. Any fear that sparked in her, causing her heart to jump, quickly spread through her core like pulses of lightning. Alice hadn't felt this way since she snuck up behind one of the estate's horses,
a reliable silver palfrey, and cut a slice of meat from its haunch.
She placed the blame for the grisly attack on a roaming pack of wolves from the nearby hill forests to a skeptical housekeeper Emilia. She fondly recalled the time she secretly placed the severed tip of her fellow maidservant's finger, cut off during supper, into her apron, knowing that the knife she handed over had been sharpened specifically for such an accident. Alice didn't question why these moments of consuming the forbidden brought her such excitement. It had been this way since she was a child, eating the forest dirt, ants, spoiled food. Initially, it was the horrified reactions of the sisters and other children at St.
Julian's that drove her, but eventually
Alice's obsessions grew to such an extent that she'd found herself in more trouble than 50 lashes at the hands of Sister Meredith.
If either housekeeper Emilia or the other maidservants found out about her secret feasts, she'd be dragged away to Colchester. Castle by the witch hunt, it didn't help that her grim features, dark eyes, sunken cheeks, snaggled teeth would be easy evidence of her evil origin, so her twisted rituals were only performed with the presence of the dark spirits, so that possessed her condemned her to this compulsion. Alice looked to the fire, which now crackled steadily. The occult altar was ready. Two hours.
Sprigs of sage, parsley and thyme danced as saffron flames from the hearth embraced the clay skillet's ochre walls. A shallow pool of sweet oil roared gently around the mingling herbs, coaxing out a blend of woody and spicy aromatics.
The leaves curled and browned, cueing the addition of this gathering's next guest. But what was to enter next was not the usual rabbit, ham preserve, or pike from the Waveney River. The forbidden ingredient was thrust into the oil, which spat and hissed in protest.
When the frenzied oil settled, Alice carefully lifted one of the warm morsels of flesh to her mouth. Her mouth watered, and her heart raced.
The bright red flesh was now charred with the cooked herbs speckling the bottom. The juices had caramelized and thickened into an almost honey-like texture.
The smell was inoffensive, slightly tart with a savory end note, but that did not do the flavors that Alice experienced in her mouth any justice. The firm and juicy bolus of the Spanish fruit that William Byron brought back from his trip to Rome
Slid down her throat, and she could feel it settle into her stomach comfortably.
She remembered when Lord Byron proudly showed off the sprawling vines in a small plot of land at the east end of the winding gardens. Among the foliage, Alice spotted green berry-like fruit, which bore a striking resemblance to the deadly nightshade, tomate.
That was the name that the merchant in Rome gave Lord Byron.
Shared by the Spanish conquistadors that brought the seeds to this part of the world for the first time. Over the next weeks, Alice had watched as the ominous berries plumped to the size of bread rolls and took on a deep blush. Stories and rumors flew around the manor as the bizarre fruit ripened, securing the allure of the tomate in Alice's mind. Alice went for another bite, and then one more. Soon the hunks of flesh were gone, leaving no evidence of her secret feast. Even the oily reduction that had formed on the pan had been sopped away with some bread she'd packed with the other ingredients. She wasn't certain if indulging her desires would ever catch up to her. Maybe she would be violently ill or even dead by morning. But she was certain of one thing: this obsession would not end with just one taste. There would have to be more.